In this lecture, we are going to be looking at biases and stereotypes with the very specific idea that this is to accompany the essay prompt that is also assigned this week. Now, before I begin, I wanted to discuss something about the class. This is not a class on political correctness. By political correctness, we mean an attitude or policy of being careful not to offend or upset any group of people in society who are believed to have a disadvantage. Some things we will discuss will cross these boundaries. Why? Because being politically correct can limit our interaction and understanding of these issues and their history. You may have already been able to tell in the African American culture lecture part 1, you often would hear me refer to African Americans as blacks. Why? Because at the time of Dred Scott, that was how the dialogue was. You'll also hear in the next lecture that this terminology is going to change from blacks to coloreds, and then we'll talk about why that's important. Now, these are terms in today's society that we would consider very politically incorrect. However, the reason why we use them is to fully understand, to help us understand the significance and the cultural beliefs at those times. This class is a class of open dialogue. However, but do not misconstrue that to mean you can get away with anything in being intentionally offensive just to be offensive. Additionally, please do not take everything I say as my personal opinion. At many times, I'll play devil's advocate to get a reaction out of you or to possibly help you see an argument from another point of view. This is a place of open dialogue. Please share your experiences in this class on your discussion boards. Often, I will not be looking for a right or wrong answer, but a well-formed argument or claim with supporting materials. My example always is, if you think the Dred Scott case was about puppies, then prove to me, show us how and why it's about puppies. Okay, well then that going on, we're going to talk in this lecture again about biases and stereotypes. First, in this course, Culture of America, what we're looking for is a multiculturalism approach, which means the coexistence of diverse cultures, where culture includes racial, religious, or cultural groups and is manifested in customary behaviors, cultural assumptions and values, patterns of thinking, and communicative styles. And so this is what we're going to explore in this course, and we're going to do it by looking, sadly we only have enough time to look at 4 distinct cultures in this class. But to get started, I want to first do an activity. So if you would, get out a piece of paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some images. And all I want you to do is just write down the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this image. Each image will only be up for about 10 seconds. And again, you're not going to share these with anyone, but please participate. So here's the first image. Next image. And again, just write down the first thing that pops in your mind. Third. Next image. Next. 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 Okay, so now what I want you to do is go back and look at your list. What first impressions, what ideas popped into your mind as you saw nothing but images of these individuals? This is getting onto the track of maybe what's called a bias. When you're looking at individuals, when we look at people, we sometimes tend to make certain judgments without ever finding information from them. These are often based in what's called bias. Bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. We hear in the news today that there was evidence of bias against certain individuals carried on by the news, meaning that the news, the media, already has made a judgment about somebody, therefore they portray them in a certain way. Biases are natural. We all have them. We are human. However, it's what we do with these biases that count. So if you go back through and you look at your list, compare them, the images again, these will be up, but compare them and see what kind of judgments, what kind of thoughts come into your mind. Interestingly enough, if you're not familiar with this individual, you might think, okay, well, he looks like a pretty clean-cut white guy. However, this is Jeffrey Dahmer, notorious serial killer. So these biases can often be wrong and cause us to make assumptions about a person based off of some belief we ourselves have. And a bias, the verb, is to cause to feel or show inclination or prejudice for or against someone or something. Again, example, reader said the paper was biased towards the conservatives, meaning that the paper would often hold the conservative views in a positive light. Are biases always negative? Absolutely not. I personally am biased against axe murders. I don't like them, I make judgments against them, and do not want to be around them. Also, biases, they don't have to be negative because if we are aware of them, you can adjust your thinking and not let them lead to negative treatment. Think of this in our world today. We live in a post 9/11 world. If you were to go to the airport and see somebody who you believe just by looking at them was from from the Middle East, and they were on your plane, would you feel uncomfortable or feel a specific way? That's a bias. Do you know anything about that individual? You don't. But because of how they look, how they dress, you are making some sort of an assumption about that person. Now, again, we may have these feelings naturally, but we need to be aware of them and we need to relate of how we act on them. If you're on the plane with that same individual who you believe is from the Middle East and you demand they're taking off the plane or you get off the plane, that's a problem. So how do you change or how do you fix these biases? Well, for that, we have to look at where do they come from? What are they based off of? And again, biases can be conscious or unconscious behavior. That's what the point of the exercise was at the beginning. Go back and look at what your initial thoughts were and look for some of your own biases. Now, the good thing about biases is that they are a learned behavior, meaning it can be unlearned or they can be changed. And there's various reasons why we may have a bias. Perhaps from a personal experience. Maybe I had an interaction once when I was little on the playground. Purple people, there was a purple person in my class, and they always beat me up every day on the playground. So from then on, I believed that all purple people were violent and I wanted nothing to do with them. That's based off of a personal experience. Now, often this is also based on because we're dependent on information that is gathered from others. So if we hear about somebody else who always got beat up by purple people, we personally don't have any interactions with purple people, so we tend to believe what we've been taught and told. Um, think about it this way too. Is it fair to categorize an entire group of individuals based off of these experiences? It's not. Think about your own personal life, whatever your race, your gender, your religion is, and think of the worst example that you can think of. Would you want to be, everyone looks at that example, we'll take Hitler, right? Um, Middle-aged, white, male, short. Well, we all know what Hitler did. Would you want that to be all, if you're a middle-aged white male, that everybody bases you off of that criteria? Or even the Jeffrey Dahmer example. Would you want to be based off of that? No, we don't, because we all want to claim that we're individuals and that we should be judged on our own. And that's true. So we ourselves need to be aware of these biases. Again, it can be unconscious. This is the behavior ideas that we have that we're not actually aware of. For maybe you believe blue-eyed people are evil through various sources and not because of any personal or known reason. Or how about when you are driving through a poor neighborhood and you lock your car doors? Is that not a bias against the people who are there, that for your own safety you have to do something? Also, other things that can lead to our bias are upbringing and our education. What you have been taught or conditioned to think by others. And this can come from many different places. Your family, your geographical location, the media, pop culture, entertainment, your school. All of this could influence the way you think. And this may result in conscious or unconscious behaviors. Think about the news media, especially in today's society. How does that affect your views on individuals based off of no other fact than where people live? Think about that. Well, people from this area, what do you automatically think about them? Or what they look like, how they're dressed, their religion. These are all biases when we make these judgments. And then biases can also lead to stereotypes. A stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Now, they are usually based somewhat in fact, but this factual information has been manipulated and usually grossly exaggerated to the point of being untrue. And here what I've got is I've got some different examples of common stereotypes. Here we see, the police officer with the donut. Here we see the traditional image of the greedy Jewish man. This is actually a postcard that was printed in the United States with the stereotype of a young African American girl. Here we see an Asian individual. This idea is based off of the model minority idea. The idea of the model minority is that in the United States, the Asian culture, which is all lumped together, which is problematic, we'll talk about that in a week or two, but that we have this that, well, this individual is smart and they're actually even above the white class, and so we have the model minority. Here, the redneck, the hick, the noble savage, the jock, the dumb blonde. These are all stereotypes. These are where we've taken some of these biases and we've exaggerated the ideals till this becomes somebody's complete identity. And again, the same as with biases, we need to be aware of these. Why? Because they can affect our lives and our interactions with other people. And it can severely limit our interactions. If there is a culture that you are biased towards, think about how much do you really know about that culture? How much have you investigated on your own, or that you're relying on the information of other people? Here are two different YouTube clips that I would like you to watch. And think about how the biases and the stereotypes are used here. The first video, how are stereotypes used at first? We have an interaction between an Indian female and an Oriental male. And at first they use the stereotypes to degrade one another. Then a white male enters into the scene. And think about how this changes the arguments. The same stereotypes that they were using to degrade each other, they're now using them as tools of empowerment. And in the second video, think about this. It's a parody. It's a commercial about making a doll. And so what happens is they're trying to avoid all the stereotypes when they create this doll. Then what happens? The doll actually loses all identity. And these are things I want you to think about and explore within yourself. And that goes with your first paper. This is a personal bias paper. The prompt is posted on Blackboard for you. It's on week 3 and it is due in week 5, which will be by Sunday, April 9th, 11:59 on Blackboard. Again, the purpose of this paper is to help you explore your own biases and discover their source. Remember, conscious and unconscious biases are learned behaviors, and we must work to overcome the personal biases that objectify other people. And by this I mean, and as I say in the prompt, if I look at somebody and a homeless man on the street and I just think, well, he's a bum, I've now made him an object. I've taken away his identity. I have no idea why this individual is there. But by doing this, it now makes him an object. And as an object, it's easier to treat people in a certain way. And we'll see this, especially in the cases that we'll be looking at this week. Why was slavery something that was able to happen? Because the slaves weren't often looked at as individuals, as people. They were looked at as objects. And that's what we do when we let biases and stereotypes control us. We objectify individuals. So what I want you to do here is I want you to think of at least 2 different biases that you have. And I'd like you to focus on biases that cause you to make assumptions about other people or culture based on appearances, which could be language, dress, physical makeup, where people live, their types of cars, skin color, religion, voice, accents, jobs. Focus on something like that. And first, what you're going to do, your paper should have 3 sections. First, you need to write a little bit about yourselves. Tell your reader where you're from. What kind of family structure do you have? What were some of the major influences on your upbringing? Second, choose 2 biases that you have discovered about yourself and then explain them and discuss how they affect your life. Finally, I want you to discuss the source of each bias. Go back in time or go deep into yourself and think about where these biases came from. If you discover your bias comes from an unquestionable or inevitable source, example, the Bible, the Quran, or any other spiritual order, please explain that source in detail, and if you cite evidence from it, you will need to cite this in your works cited page. These papers will not be shared with anyone but me, so you can be as frank as you want. However, please don't be openly offensive and hostile. But this is an exploration. I want you to think about you. The papers do need to be in MLA format. However, you don't need a works cited page unless you do cite outside sources. This paper is a little different from other papers. It's not a formal paper. This is a personal reflection, so you may use first person in this. I, me, we, us. However, remember this is a paper you're turning in for a grade, so it should be well constructed and follow the rules of English composition and grammar. Those rules are never optional. Your paper should be at least 3 to 5 pages in length. Please feel free to make an appointment with me to discuss any questions or concerns or send me emails. However, I do not read full drafts of papers through email. Why? Because the night before it's due, everybody emails me a draft. However, if you'd like to make an appointment in person, I will happily go over a draft at that point. But if you have any questions about the paper, please shoot me an email. Again, remember, this is not it's an informal paper, but you are still turning it in for a formal grade. So make sure you are taking time and giving a well-constructed paper. And what I want to see is evidence of you thinking about your own self and personal biases that you have within your life. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know.